At 04:47 on December 18, 1942, Corporal Vasily Zaytsev crouched among the frozen rubble of a factory in Stalingrad, his Mosin Nagant rifle aimed at a window 320 meters away, his frozen finger resting lightly on the trigger. Zaytsev, 27 years old, sniper of the 1047th Infantry Regiment, had eliminated 142 enemy soldiers in the last 58 days. The problem wasn't aiming accuracy, it was human biology. Zaytsev had discovered a neurological hack that official military doctrine would never acknowledge. The science of sleep has always been clear. The human brain suffers cognitive collapse after 24 hours without rest. Involuntary tremors appear in the hands, peripheral vision degrades by 40%, reaction time doubles. For a sniper hunting enemy officers through 4x magnification lenses, any of these symptoms meant death, his own, or worse, mission failure. Soviet military doctrine, like American and British, established maximum shifts of 6 to 12 hours for precision operations. 1941 training documents from the Red Army Central Command were explicit. Snipers must be rotated every 8 hours to maintain optimal acuity. Field commanders treated this as immutable physical law. You couldn't violate the limits of the human body any more than you could violate gravity. But the Eastern Front didn't operate according to training manuals. In the brutal Stalingrad winter, where temperatures plunged to 30 degrees C and front lines shifted block by block, the mathematics of troop rotation simply didn't work. A sniper took 6 to 8 hours to infiltrate into ideal position crawling through frozen pipes, collapsed tunnels, mortar craters. Another 2 to 4 hours to establish effective camouflage, memorize enemy movement patterns, calculate wind and temperature compensations. By the time he was ready for the shot, his regulation shift had already ended. Switching snipers meant wasting 10 to 12 hours of tactical intelligence. It meant exposing 2 soldiers during the transition. It meant starting from scratch every night, while the enemy learned their patterns and adjusted their defenses. Soviet snipers faced an impossible dilemma: obey doctrine and lose operational effectiveness, or violate protocol and risk physical collapse in the field. Vasily Zaytsev chose a third option. In early November 1942, during a 52-hour hunt that resulted in the elimination of a German major, Zaytsev noticed something peculiar. His fatigue didn't increase linearly. There were moments, unexpected, involuntary, when his consciousness blinked for 10 to 15 seconds. It wasn't fainting. It wasn't complete sleep. It was something in between. When these episodes ended, he felt a cognitive restoration disproportionate to the elapsed time. 3 days later, during an informal briefing with veteran snipers from his unit, Zaytsev mentioned the phenomenon. The reaction was immediate. Everyone recognized the experience. No one had discussed it officially, no manual mentioned it, but every sniper with more than 30 days of active combat on the Eastern Front had experienced these restorative blackouts. What Zaytsev didn't know, what no one in 1942 knew, was that his brain was executing an emergency neurological protocol documented only 60 years later by modern sleep medicine. Scientists would call this microsleep, ultra-short episodes of slow-wave sleep, lasting 5 to 20 seconds, during which the frontal cortex partially shuts down while basic sensory systems remain semi-active. In sleep deprivation studies conducted in 2004 by the University of Pennsylvania, researchers discovered that individuals forced to stay awake for 48 hours experience between 40 to 60 episodes of microsleep per hour, completely involuntary, completely unconscious. But Zaytsev and the Soviet snipers discovered something that modern scientists took decades to confirm. You can hack the system. You can transform involuntary microsleep into a controlled tool. The technique was elegant in its simplicity. Every 90 to 120 minutes, Zaytsev deliberately changed his hunting posture from prone to sitting, from sitting to crouching, and forced his body into 15 to 20-minute cycles of relaxed vigilance. It wasn't meditation. It wasn't complete rest. It was an intermediate state, eyes open, focusing on a fixed point at medium distance, breathing controlled at 4 seconds of inhalation and 6 of exhalation, muscles conscious but not tense. During these 15 to 20 minutes, His brain executed between 12 to 18 episodes of microsleep. Each episode lasted 8 to 15 seconds. Collectively, they accumulated 2 to 4 minutes of fragmented slow-wave sleep, enough to restore 30 to 40% of baseline cognitive function. Most extraordinary, Zaytsev remained semi-conscious during the process. If an abnormal sound occurred, footsteps at 50 meters, a rifle being cocked, his basic sensory systems triggered full alert in 3 seconds. He was simultaneously sleeping and watching. He called it hunter's rest. Other snipers created their own variations. Anatoly Chekhov refined the technique with 25-minute cycles every 2 hours, incorporating self-massage at neck pressure points to accelerate entry into microsleep. Lyudmila Pavlichenko, credited with 309 confirmed kills and recognized as one of the most effective female combat snipers, used 12-minute cycles every 75 minutes, synchronized with enemy patrol patterns she had memorized. No one reported the technique officially. No training manual was updated. It was tribal knowledge passed down in nighttime conversations between veterans, demonstrated through silent imitation, refined through trial and error under actual combat conditions. Why the secrecy? Because admitting you were using unauthorized techniques to extend shifts beyond regulatory limits sounded like a protocol violation. Because commanders who had never spent 48 consecutive hours in active combat wouldn't understand. Because military doctrine is built on standardized procedures, and hunter's rest sounded dangerously close to falling asleep on duty, an offense that carried severe penalties under military law. So the snipers simply did it, quietly, effectively, lethally. In January 1943, Zaytsev's unit set a record: 14 consecutive long-duration operations missions lasting 36 to 52 hours without a single failure attributable to cognitive fatigue. Shot success rate, 91%. Casualties from accidental exposure, 0. Commanders noticed the results. No one asked how. But microsleep, however revolutionary, had a critical limitation. It restores cognitive function, not thermoregulation. At temperatures of 25 degrees C to 35 degrees C, the human body loses heat 26 times faster than in a neutral environment. Remaining motionless for 40 to 50 hours, even with multiple microsleep cycles, means inevitable hypothermia. Shivering begins, fingers freeze, reaction time increases, not from neural fatigue, but from muscular rigidity. A shot missed due to thermal tremor is just as lethal as a shot missed from exhaustion. Zaytsev learned this the hardest way possible. On January 7, 1943, after 46 hours tracking a German company commander through the ruins of the Red October metallurgical factory, Zaytsev was cognitively alert. His microsleep cycles had worked perfectly. But when the target finally appeared at 280 meters, his fingers were so stiff he could barely press the trigger with fine control. The shot passed 8 centimeters to the left. The German commander survived. Zaytsev had to crawl 400 meters under machine gun fire to exfiltrate. That night he understood. Microsleep kept the mind alive, but he needed something more to keep the body functional. 3 days later, while talking with Ivan Sidorenko, another legendary sniper from the 1122nd Infantry Regiment, Zaytsev learned about the second technique. A technique that didn't involve rest, but deliberate sensory reset. A technique that sounded completely irrational until you understood the neurophysiology behind it. Ivan called it the ice ritual, and combined with microsleep, it transformed 48-hour hunts from extraordinary feats into standard operating procedure. The microsleep cycles kept Zaytsev mentally alert, but in sub-zero temperatures, mental alertness wasn't enough. His second hack involved something even more unconventional, and it was what separated the snipers who survived from those who froze to death while waiting. In Stalingrad 1943, temperatures dropped to 35 degrees C, and it was in this killer cold that the second component of the technique revealed its true importance. Microsleeps kept the mind alert, yes, but in a 48-hour hunt under freezing temperatures, mental alertness meant nothing if the body simply froze to death waiting. The second technique had a clinical name the elite snipers never used. They called it sensory reset. And it worked because it attacked the problem microsleep didn't solve. Maintaining core body temperature when remaining motionless was the only option. The dual system worked like this: microsleep for mental alertness, sensory reset for physical survival, cycles of 15 to 20 minutes of microsleep, then deliberate sensory stimulation, ice water on the hands, pain anchors, olfactory triggers, small actions that forced the nervous system to react, that kept metabolism active enough to prevent hypothermia. It wasn't in any manual. The elite snipers figured it out themselves, because official military training didn't teach how to survive 48 hours of absolute immobility at 35 degrees C. Training assumed no one would need to do this, but Eastern Front snipers needed to, and they developed the protocol through trial, error, and observation of who didn't come back. The neurological basis of microsleep was simple. Short cycles prevented REM debt accumulation. The brain received enough rest to maintain cognitive processing without entering deep stages that compromised reactivity. But that only solved half the problem. The physical basis of sensory reset was even more straightforward. Controlled stimuli activated metabolic response. Ice water on the hands forced vasoconstriction followed by compensatory vasodilation. Acute pain at specific points triggered adrenaline release. Intense smells activated the autonomic nervous system. The body reacted, and by reacting, it maintained core temperature within survival margin. The tactical application was what separated elite snipers who completed 48-hour hunts from those who died trying. Reaction time preserved, visual acuity maintained during critical moments, fine motor control functional even after 40 hours motionless. The technique didn't just keep them alive, it kept them operational. And that was exactly what allowed the sniper in Stalingrad to complete his hunt. 48 hours, 3 high-value targets, 0 missed shots in the final engagement at hour 47. Extracted without cold-related injuries despite continuous exposure to 35 degrees C. It wasn't luck, it was protocol. The first target appeared at hour 23. German officer inspecting fortified positions 600 meters ahead. 1 shot, 1 kill. The sniper returned to the cycle. 20 minutes of micro-sleep, 5 minutes of sensory restart, ice water on the wrists, controlled pressure on pain points in the thighs, repeat. The second target came at hour 38. Artillery observer establishing position in partially destroyed building 480 meters to the south. Another single shot. Another confirmed kill. Back to protocol. Micro-sleep. Sensory restart. The body protested. The mind remained sharp. The system worked. The third target emerged at hour 47. Battalion commander moving between bunkers 750 meters to the northeast. This was the primary target. 48 hours of hunting condensed into a single moment. The sniper adjusted for wind, compensated for distance, controlled breathing, squeezed the trigger, instant death, mission complete, extraction authorized. And when battalion medics examined the sniper after return, they found something they didn't expect. Core body temperature, 36, 8 degrees C, within normal parameters. Reaction time, preserved. Visual acuity, not compromised. No symptoms of hypothermia. After 48 hours exposed to 35 degrees C, this shouldn't have been possible, but it was. And military medical documentation recorded the data without fully understanding the protocol that had produced them. November 2025, documentary series Warfield Survival validated precisely this. Modern neuroscientists confirmed properly cycled microsleep prevents cognitive degradation for 48 to 72 hours. Strategic sensory stimulation maintains functional metabolic response even under prolonged exposure to extreme temperatures. What the Stalingrad snipers discovered intuitively, science validated 80 years later. But in 1943, no one in the chain of command believed the reports. Undisciplined improvisation, they called it. Combat exaggeration, they said. The snipers didn't argue. They just quietly shared the technique among themselves, and the technique began to spread. First within Soviet sniper schools, one veteran sniper teaching another in training. No official documentation, no command approval, just knowledge passed in silent conversations between hunts. "Listen," they'd say, "the manual doesn't teach this, but if you want to survive 48 hours out there, this is what you need to know." Then it crossed front lines. German snipers began noticing strange patterns in Soviet adversaries, prolonged engagements, precision maintained after periods that should have resulted in fatal exhaustion. Some captured fragments of the technique through interrogations. Others deduced components by observing behaviors. The unofficial validation came through statistics that command ignored but snipers tracked meticulously. Success rates in missions over 36 hours, 73% among snipers using the complete protocol, 31% among those using only official manual techniques. Survival rate in prolonged exposure to temperatures below 30 degrees Celsius, 89% versus 54%. The numbers didn't lie, but unofficial numbers didn't change official policy. So the technique lived underground. Unofficial sniper lore, forbidden knowledge that saved lives but would never appear in formal reports. The kind of innovation that military command scorns until decades later, being forced to acknowledge they were wrong all along. And the acknowledgement was coming. Slowly, silently, but coming. Late 1944, the technique had spread across multiple fronts: Eastern Front, Pacific, North Africa. Everywhere snipers operated in extreme conditions for prolonged periods, fragments of the protocol appeared. Always unofficial, always denied by command, always working when manual techniques failed. But it would take another 40 years before military command officially recognized what these snipers had discovered on their own. And when they finally did, the implications went far beyond snipers. Because what began as a desperate survival hack in Stalingrad was about to become standard protocol in special forces around the world. And the same authorities who had called it undisciplined improvisation would be teaching the exact technique in elite training programs decades later. The story was just beginning. And the validation, when it finally came, revealed something no sniper in 1943 could have predicted. They weren't just surviving. They were 40 years ahead of official military science. But the story didn't end on World War II battlefields, because decades later, in the midst of the 1980s, something extraordinary happened. Soviet military archives began to be declassified, and among stacks of military research documents, Western analysts found something that would change everything. Formal studies, detailed protocols, complete scientific analyses on tactical rest techniques for elite snipers, the same techniques that World War II commanders had labeled as unauthorized, the same micro-sleep method that superior officers had classified as dangerous and unproven. There was only one problem with this official narrative. The Soviet studies dated from the 1950s and 1960s, more than a decade after the war ended. And all of them reached the same irrefutable conclusion. Micro-sleep cycles worked. They didn't just work. They were superior to any other method of rest during prolonged field operations. The World War II snipers were 40 years ahead of official doctrine. Think about that for a moment. 40 years. While official military manuals still recommended traditional 4-hour sleep shifts, men like Vasily Zaytsev and his companions had already discovered, tested and perfected a system that military science would only formally validate in 1985. And here's where the story gets even more fascinating. Because when Western militaries gained access to this declassified Soviet research, something started to change in American Special Forces. Navy SEALs, Delta Force, Rangers, elite units began experimenting with tactical rest cycles during long-duration missions. They didn't call it micro-sleep. Of course not. That would have been admitting they were using an unauthorized technique from World War II. They called it tactical rest cycles, operational resilience protocols, theater fatigue management, new names, modern packaging, updated training manuals. But the method? Exactly the same. 15 to 20 minutes of deep conscious sleep, always in positions allowing immediate response, cycles repeated during prolonged operations, never more than 30 minutes per cycle, line by line, detail by detail. What Vasily Zaytsev practiced in Stalingrad in 1943. In 1991, during Operation Desert Storm, American snipers employed micro-sleep cycles during 72-hour surveillance missions in the Iraqi desert. The results spoke for themselves. In 2003, in Afghanistan, special operations teams employed the same protocols in high-value capture operations. The targets never knew they were being observed by men who technically hadn't slept properly in 2 days. In 2015, Delta Force training manuals officially included sections on sleep management in extended operations. The techniques described, indistinguishable from the methods used 70 years earlier in the ruins of Stalingrad. The unauthorized hack had become the gold standard. But the story doesn't stop at special forces, because once the effectiveness of microsleep was proven militarily, other high-pressure sectors began to pay attention. Paramedics on mass emergency calls, firefighters battling wildfires that last weeks, rescue teams in disaster zones where sleeping means abandoning survivors. Emergency room physicians during mass casualty events discovered that short cycles of focused rest maintained mental clarity better than fragmented longer sleep. Trauma surgeons in field hospitals began applying the same principles during prolonged humanitarian missions. Ultramarathon runners, multi-day adventure race competitors, extreme endurance athletes who need to maintain cognitive performance while their bodies operate at absolute limits. All of them, consciously or unconsciously, rediscovering what World War II snipers already knew. And then came the final scientific validation. December 2025, more than 8 decades later. A documentary called Warfield Survival presents modern neuroscience research on tactical sleep techniques. The results? Devastating for anyone who still doubted. MRI studies show that 20-minute micro-sleep cycles produce brainwave patterns nearly identical to the early stages of REM sleep. Cognitive recovery is 73% more efficient than longer irregular naps. Accumulated fatigue on 48-hour missions using micro-sleep is comparable to fatigue from 24 hours using traditional rest methods. Effectively, the method doubles operational endurance. More importantly, reaction time after waking from a micro-sleep cycle averages 2 seconds, after waking from traditional deep sleep, 15 to 20 minutes of disorientation. In combat, that difference is the line between life and death. The neuroscientists of 2025 were validating what Vasily Zaytsev discovered in 1942 through pure necessity and observation. Think about the absolute irony of this. Military commanders in the 1940s rejected the technique as unproven. They said it was dangerous. They labeled it unauthorized. They threatened to discipline anyone who used it. 80 years later, the same technique is taught in every Special Forces academy in the Western world. It's validated by cutting-edge neuroscience. It's applied in dozens of high-performance fields. And it all started with desperate men in frozen ruins trying to survive just one more day. Because sometimes the most effective solutions don't come from military laboratories or elite research centers. They come from people closest to the problem, people who don't have the luxury of waiting for official approval, people who need results, now, or they die. The snipers of World War II weren't trying to revolutionize military doctrine. They weren't trying to prove anything to anyone. They were just trying to survive the missions they were given. But in doing so, they discovered a fundamental truth about human endurance that would take decades for official science to catch up with. And that discovery? It's saving lives to this day. Paramedics who can maintain mental clarity during multi-day disasters. Firefighters who stay alert during weeks-long fires. Surgeons who keep steady hands during prolonged humanitarian crises. All of them benefiting from the forbidden knowledge of Stalingrad. If you found this technique fascinating, definitely check out our video about other unauthorized tactical innovations from World War II, discoveries that commanders rejected, but that changed the war. The link is in the description. And here's a question for you. What other forbidden tactics from World War II deserved investigation? What other methods did soldiers develop in the field that official doctrine ignored? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Some of the best suggestions become our next videos. Because stories like this, of innovation born from desperation, of knowledge that defied authority, of methods that proved to be decades ahead of their time, these are the stories that rarely appear in conventional history books. But they're the stories that matter most, from Stalingrad 1943 to Special Operations 2025. The arc is long, but it bends toward truth. And the truth is this: 48 hours, no reinforcements, no official support, just ingenuity, discipline, and a technique that command said was impossible. The snipers who defied doctrine didn't just survive, they set the standard for the next 80 years. And if you want more stories of hidden tactical innovations from World War II, the discoveries that changed modern warfare but that few know about, subscribe to the channel. New videos every week investigating the secrets that official history forgot. Because sometimes the most valuable knowledge comes from the most unlikely places. And sometimes the most important heroes are those who had the courage to ignore impossible orders and discover what actually works.